particular, today we're starting our first model of the economy. Remember, the point of the model is to simplify the world so much that we understand something about it. We can do this cleverly and learn something that's real and true. We can do this stupidly and learn something that seems unimportant or even wrong. So there's an art to this, but we are certainly going to simplify the world quite a lot. Let's see. Okay, that's not where we were. We did that, we did that, we did that. Okay, I have the whole page all together. Oh, there we go, first macroeconomic model. So this is the Keynesian model, named after John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes was a giant in macroeconomics in the early 20th century. Starting, say, 80 years ago. Maybe 90 years ago. A while ago, right? I'll tell a Keynes story before we start. Keynes, when he was young, he was all well connected and powerful family and all that. So he was the junior person, one of the junior people, on the Treaty of Versailles, where they were negotiating the end of World War I. Right? And famously, the Treaty of Versailles was extremely punitive to Germany. And Mr. Keynes was just a junior guy, carrying people's briefcases and bringing coffee and tea and that kind of thing. It was just like, maybe he was 20 years old. Very junior guy. But after he got out, after it was all over, he wrote a book called The Economic Consequences of the Peace. And in that book, he said that this treaty was so punitive that Germany was going to have to pay so much in reparations that they would end up running a giant inflation. And that would cause social upheaval, which would lead to the rise of a dictator and a new world war. They did this in, 1920? None of that came to pass, obviously, so it was just a thing he did. But here we're going to be talking about his sort of great macroeconomic work, which is about how to get out of a depression. So we're in a really bad economic situation. How do we get out of that? And hopefully, in the process, we can learn something that applies to non-depression times at all. But you should keep in mind that this is a model really of the Great Depression. It was made in the 30s to understand the Great Depression, why we had so many people who were out of work, who wanted jobs, and at the same time we had so many factories that were just empty. It seems logical, you just put them together. Right? You take the people who are out of work and you give them the factories and then they're making stuff and the economy working again. And yet that wasn't happening. Right, so he wanted to explain that, why unemployment can be so persistent, why unused resources can be unused for a long period of time, trying to explain that. Okay, we already did this as well. There we go. This is the one. So this is the Keynesian model, named after Mr. Keynes, known as the Keynesian cross diagram. You'll find it in your books under various titles if you're not using our book. You're looking for the multiplier, the government spending multiplier, Keynesian model, Keynesian cross diagram, and spending this stuff. It's the first model in macroeconomics they do, almost certainly. Okay. Well, to explain the Great Depression, and this is important that it's developed to explain the Great Depression, because we're obviously going to simplify the world. We're going to have simplifying assumptions about the world, and these are obviously going to be silly, because we're simplifying a complicated world, and so we're leaving out lots of important stuff. But in particular, they're going to seem to us a little sillier than they did then, because here we're trying to explain the Great Depression. It is a model in which we have lots of unused resources. So that's going to be important to this. And in a world where we don't have as many unused resources, it's going to feel less real to us. Now, hopefully we can still learn something that's real even in our day, but we want to think about it at the beginning as a model for a major depression and what we can do then. So our story is going to be that the reason all of these resources are unused, that workers are not hired, why factories are empty, is because people aren't buying stuff. And if you're not buying anything, there is no point for anyone to open their factory. Even if you've got a factory, you've got the workers, there's no point opening it because nobody is going to buy your product. Okay. And that's going to be our story. And we just have too little spending to support full employment, too little spending to get us to the normal level of output, that utilize the resources we've got. Okay. And therefore, if we have a depression, the story goes, if you buy it, and you can wait and see whether you do, that one way to get out of a recession is to start spending. Right? And if individuals aren't spending, the government can do it. The government can start buying stuff, and that will cause the economy to recover. And then it's worth opening a factory because you have a customer, you have the government as your customer, your factory is open, therefore people are back to work, and those people will spend as well because now they have an income. And this will get us out of the depression. That's going to be our story. So, we're going to assume a lot of things, and none of these assumptions are going to be realistic. Again, realistic is not a goal of a model. A goal of the model is understanding, right? And so we're going to make a lot of unrealistic assumptions, and your job is to think, how do they capture something real or not? Right? And if you say, yeah, they capture something essential about the economy, you are in good company. I can line up 5 Nobel Prize winners. It's actually very easy, line up 20 Nobel Prize winners who agree with you. If you say, no, this is rubbish, and is it capturing anything important about the economy at all, I can line up at least 10 Nobel Prize winners who agree with you on that. So, you're in good company either way. You should think for yourself and think, how do you think this thing is? Is it capturing something real? Isn't it capturing something real? And, yeah. Now, we're going to make a very, very simple model, and then we're going to make it more realistic as we go along. It's a model that's designed for the Great Depression. We are going to change it a bit later on. We're going to add to it later on to make it applicable to nowadays as well. So that the basic story that's going to happen here will also happen in normal times as well, if you buy the model. But at the moment, we're in the Great Depression world. Okay. So here's our first big assumption. First big ridiculous assumption. It's assumed that in the short run, firms have set their prices, and they're just going to wait and see who comes, and whoever comes, we are going to produce the thing and sell it to them. So this is an economy of barbers. Okay? Everybody's cutting hair, that's all we do. You can think about it this way. All we're doing is cutting hair, and we sit there in our barber shop, and we post a price, 20 euros for a haircut, and we just wait and see if customers come. And if a customer comes, we produce the haircut. And if a customer doesn't come, we don't. Okay? So the price is fixed. We're not changing that in the short run. And then we just produce stuff as people want to buy it. Okay, that's going to be our story. Now, there's two problems with this, right? One problem is the price is fixed, and the other problem is that we're just producing stuff when people want it. Okay? That works for haircuts. That makes sense for haircuts, but it doesn't make sense for lots of other things, right? If you're selling TVs, usually you produce the TV and then you see who buys it, right? So it's not literally true in most of the economy. I picked the haircut example for a reason, but we're going to pretend like it is. Okay? Now, I can argue that it's not too bad, and here's my argument for why I think it's not too bad. That, yeah, they produce the TVs ahead of time, but if nobody's buying them, they're going to stop pretty quick. They're going to have 5 warehouses full of TVs, and then they're going to shut down the factory. And so this literally, we produce it earlier, we don't produce it, and then we only produce it when people buy it. It's not literally true, but maybe captures something there that if we're not buying, they're not going to produce. Now you can say that, well, that's your little weaselly excuse, but I don't buy it. I think that this is an important thing, and you would not be wrong. Right? We're about, do we capture something real or not? And that's a judgment call, right? About your understanding about how the world works. But this is going to be our story. We have this haircutting thing. People come to the shop or not. If they come, we produce a haircut. If they don't come, we don't. Okay? The other thing is we have these preset prices. And this is mostly kind of true, right? I don't know. There's bound to be somebody who disagrees with this. But I don't know anyone who vehemently disagrees with preset prices. Almost all the stores you go, not quite literally always. If you go on the web and try to buy something, there's going to be a price listed there, right? And you decide whether you buy it or not. Now, this isn't true of all products. If you want to buy a new aircraft, for instance, or you want to buy for your fleet of 1,000 aircraft, you want to buy another few Boeings, you're going to negotiate that price. It's not a posted price for that. If you want to buy Oracle software, you're going to negotiate, buying Oracle software, you're going to negotiate with the guy. They don't have a fixed price, they don't have a set price. So it's not true of everything, but it is true of loads and loads and loads of things that we see the price and decide whether to buy or not based on that price. You've experienced this in your life, that you go into a shop and there's a price posted there, and it's up to you whether to buy or not. Or do you negotiate everything? I don't know you in your life, how much Oracle software or aircraft you buy, but most of us, most of the time, we see a price, we decide whether to buy it or not. That, to me, seems normal. The part that's not normal is we're just going to have this preset price and we're not going to think about changing it. That is, we set the price and we see who comes. Okay? Now this happens, right? You go to your barber and there's a price set there, there's the 20 euros, and you decide whether to get a haircut or not. That happens. The question is, how long do they leave these prices the same when weird things happen in the market? So suppose you had a barber shop and you set your 20 euros there and everyone looked in the window, looked at your sign and walked away. Well, eventually you think, I have no customers, let me try a lower price to attract customers. You would change your price in response to demand. Okay? We are going to assume that doesn't happen. Okay? And if you had loads of customers and there was a huge line out the block, you would think, maybe I can charge 25 euros and it'll be okay. Or I got more customers than I can handle, it'll be okay. Okay? Now, we're not going to have in our story anything about more customers than we can handle. We can handle as many customers as show up in this little story. We're going to change that later on as well. We're starting with the simplest models, but at the moment we're going to have, you can sell as much as people want to buy. Okay. Now, in this sense, it's a little silly, except I don't think everybody, whenever you say everybody, it's a little, there's always some weirdo, but almost everybody, like everybody I know, agrees that prices are set for most things, and they meet the demand of those things, and that eventually prices might get changed. And the difference of opinion, a major difference of opinion in macroeconomics, is how long that eventually is. Right? And this is going to be a model where, in the short run, this is the crucial jargon here, firms have their prices set and they don't change them. Okay? And then, how important this model is going to depend very much on how long we think those prices are preset for. Right? If the firm sets its price every morning and then sees how many customers shows up and then resets the price for the next morning, then our short run is just one day, 24 hours, because they're adjusting their price. In which case, this model is going to be fairly close to useless. And the people that really object to this model, those Nobel Prize winners I lined up, they mostly object to it, largely object to it on the grounds that prices can change pretty quickly, particularly when things are really, really bad. I mean, they don't literally change their prices every day, but if things are really bad or really good, they will change their prices pretty quickly. And so this short run, in their view, is very short. So Keynes, this is very famously a model about the short run, and Keynes was hugely influential in policy circles. It's the New Deal response to the Great Depression in the US, Britain's response to the Great Depression in UK, were all based on Keynes's theory, and they spent a lot of spending hoping to get things going, and so he was in the news. And they asked him, why this emphasis on the short run? Shouldn't we be concerned about the long run as well? And he said, well, in the long run, we're all dead, so maybe not so much. So he was thinking that the short run was quite a while. And you can think what you like. In Keynes's defense, in terms of the short run, when we think about the barber shop, it seems like, how long are they going to leave the price fixed if nobody's showing up, right? They're going to change the price relatively quickly, maybe a month or so. They're going to go with nobody in the shop, and then they're going to change the price. And so then the short run is like a month. which means that the model isn't going to be super interesting, at least in this form. We'll add to it later, it'll be more interesting then. But remember, these are prices, and that's the price of everything. And in particular, it's the price of inputs to the production process. So the price of labor, the price of raw materials, the price of, industrial steel, and all of this stuff. And a lot of these things have contracts that go on for a while, right? So you get in a contract with somebody, and you're going to, I'm going to pay you so much for the next year, 2 years, and it's hard to bring those prices down. Particularly wages are hard to bring down, and because you may know yourself that nobody likes a pay cut, and people get really angry, and even if they don't quit, they stop caring about their job, they start being malicious, they start being a problem rather than an asset. And so you don't really want to piss off your employees, your existing employees, and so lowering wages can be really difficult and time-consuming. And that's one of the prices. So we're really thinking all the prices in the economy. Keynes famously said that wages are sticky downwards. It's easy to raise people's wages, nobody objects, but it is hard to lower people's wages. It takes time, it takes pain, it takes a lot of industrial strife. It is not easy or cheap to do. Now you may disagree, right? You're allowed to disagree, you'd be fair enough to disagree, but that's the argument, that getting prices to go down is going to be a problem because you're the barber and you're charging 20 euros per haircut, but a lot of that goes to labor costs, right? And if you're thinking about lowering your price to 15 euros, but you can't lower your labor costs, you've got a problem, right? And so it's going to be hard to lower your price to 15 euros because you can't lower all the prices at the same time. That's the argument. Now, in this, we're simplifying the world and we're saying the price and we're ignoring the labor costs and all that. But in the back of our mind, that's what's going on, right? You can say, we're having tough times, therefore I need to lower your wages. But the trouble with businesses is that they're lying bastards. And even when they're having good times, they'll still pretend they're having bad times. I'm sorry, it all went to executive pay, we got no money left to pay you. And they're always trying to reduce your wages. So they're kind of the boy who called crying wolf, and people are always resist the lower of wages. This is the argument. Okay. So, literally in our model, we have firms set their prices, and then for a period of time, the short run, however long you think that is, I'm going to keep talking about it like a year-ish, because that's easy, but it's however long you think it is. Is it a day? Is it 2 years? Is it 5 years? Whatever, until everybody fully adjusts their prices. They're just meeting demand. Whoever walks in the door, they're cutting their hair. If nobody walks in the door, they're not producing haircuts. This is going to be our story. Okay, this is the central conceit of this model. Now, you can see right now that we have indeed simplified the world, right? There's loads of stuff in all of this that we're ignoring, and there's loads of important things in all of this that we're ignoring. But that's how we're setting it up. Okay? That's our simplification. The jargon for this, by the way, is not changing the price. It is menu costs, and this is going back to the old days. You won't remember this, you're young. But before COVID, way back then, it used to be that restaurants had menus. And that was a thing. And in the old days, like way before your time, but in my time, back when I was young, it used to be, certainly back when Keynes was around, right? It used to be that they printed those menus. And it wasn't just that you ran your laser printer and ran off a new set of menus, but you actually had to have them typeset by professional printers. Right? You had to have them typeset, and they had to do the whole thing. They had to make a run. They had to clean the machine so that they could print your thing, and they would print your thing. So it was like a thing to print a menu. It was not something you did every day, or you could do every day. So the idea there is that there's a cost of printing the menu, and therefore, if your price is wrong, right? So you say, I'm charging 20 euros, but really the ideal price would be 19.50. It's not worth printing the menu just for that, because there's a cost of printing the menu cost, right? And therefore you don't do it. And so even when demand isn't what you had hoped, you don't lower your price because you don't want to pay this menu cost. Now that's the metaphor, this menu thing, but menu costs aren't really about menus. First of all, very few businesses have menus. They have catalogs and stuff. But that isn't the main cost of changing your price. Right? In real life, the main cost of changing your prices is this. Well, there's two main costs. One, decisions, and two, consumers hate it. Right? So think of yourself, like you go into the shop and you say, okay, how much does toothpaste cost? And you check out the toothpaste and you figure out the best toothpaste. This is my obsession, right? It's huge variation in toothpaste. Anyway, I'll leave it alone, but if you ever want to look at toothpaste prices, they're interesting. Anyway, you figure out which toothpaste you're going to buy, right? I do toothpaste, you may do some other product. We don't do all of them, right? Because you can't be doing that every day. Like, you got to live your life. Right? So you go and you figure out what toothpaste is best, and you kind of just automatically buy it. And then if those firms start changing their price every day, and you're buying that one because it's the cheapest, and then you look and it's no longer the cheapest because they changed their price, you get annoyed. You get annoyed with that brand, you get pissed off, you don't buy it again. Right? And so consumers really dislike frequent price changes. Right? And so firms pay a cost in terms of consumer loyalty when they change their price. It's not just a costless thing. Consumers get pissed off, you lose some of your customers. You may have had loyal customers before, and now they become fickle. Now all of a sudden they're looking at the prices of your competitors, where before they were just buying them randomly. And so that is a cost to the business. That goes into the menu cost category. Even though it has nothing to do with menus, we call it a menu cost, and the menu is just a metaphor. Right. The other cost is the decision cost. So you suppose you decide you have an international conglomerate and you're producing, I don't know, you're producing cheese. I'm obsessed with cheese. You're producing cheese and you're selling it off the grill in the world, hundreds of tons of cheese every year, and then you decide, I think our price is wrong. I think our price should be a little lower. I think that would be better. Right? And you're a business student, and you decide. I've been studying the cheese thing, and our price is 10% too high, we should lower our price by 10%. Okay. Now, because you were studying the cheese thing, we know that you're not the president of the company, because he doesn't have time for that. Right? So you're some minion, mid-level manager, and you realize the cheese price is wrong. And so you need to go to your boss and say, look, our cheese price is wrong. And you have to convince the boss, yeah, indeed, the cheese price is wrong. And the boss has to go to the board meeting and say, look, our cheese price is suboptimal. We can get even more money by changing our cheese price. But of course, Joe in the cracker division is going to be all upset about that. No, it's going to make the crackers look too expensive. And so there's going to be a fight in the boardroom. You're going to have to decide that. You're going to have to do testing with one, and people are going to say, well, what about the consumers? Will they be mad when we change our cheese prices? So you're going to have to do focus groups and bring in the guys and talk to them. And all of that takes time, all of that takes effort, all of that is a menu cost. Okay? Now you guys haven't mostly worked in big organizations, but big organizations are always ridiculously bureaucratic. And so these costs are real, these costs are time consuming. Right? And maybe it makes your career, but it's not easy to get the cheese price change. Okay. Anyway, that's our rationale for why prices don't change all the time. Now they do change, right? If the price is too high, eventually it will come down. And our big question is, how long is that eventually? Okay, and that's a judgment call that you get to make yourself. It's an empirical question, so we could just look at the data. Now I can tell you that people have looked at this data every way, but now, like for 50 years, 80 years, they've been looking at the data trying to show, and it's inconclusive. And it's difficult to tell how long these things are. It's different with industries, it's complicated, and so it comes down to your judgment about how the economy works. And you're in good company either way. But for the rest of this model, the short run is however long it takes for the prices to change fully throughout the economy. Okay. Now, we don't have a story yet, though, so we need to sort of come up with a story. And a story in economics, almost always, I'm going to say always, is a story about how people are making decisions. Okay? So we need characters for our story. You just have, there's a ball going through space and there's prices and stuff. That's not a story. We need people making decisions. We need characters in our play. And so we need to talk about how people make decisions. So we're going to be looking at planned aggregate expenditure, which is the total amount that we plan on spending as an economy. Okay, and so this is going to be, here, planned aggregate expenditure is C plus I, P, plus G plus net exports. So C we know, G we know, net exports we know. These are all known. The only difference here is we have IP instead of I. I was investment, you'll recall, how much firms are buying. And here, we're just having how much firms are planning to buy. Okay? This is not a distinction that's going to be super important in this class, but it is kind of nice to see it at this stage. So you remember, investment was, if I'm a firm and I buy a factory, that's investment. If I'm a firm and I buy a car, that's investment. If I'm a consumer and I buy a house, that's investment. All these sort of long-term decision sort of things. But there was also one other sort of investment, and that's inventories. I might buy inventories for my warehouse. And if I plan on buying inventories to have in my warehouse, then next year it'll be really cheap to produce stuff because I just have it in my warehouse, right? And so that investment, that buying of inventory counts as investment. But sometimes you didn't want to buy inventory. You thought, I'm gonna buy a whole bunch of Barbies because the Barbie movie came out, and I think running up to Christmas, everybody's gonna want to buy Barbies, right? And so I do a warehouse full of Barbies running up to Christmas. Okay? Sound business plan, makes perfect sense. I got tons and tons of Barbies, and I don't plan on having any of them left at the end of Christmas. I plan on selling them. So I plan on 0 Barbies in my warehouse at the end of the year. But it turns out it wasn't really a Barbie movie, it was more of a Ken movie. I'm just saying. And so everybody buys the Kens, nobody buys my Barbies. And so I've got a warehouse full of Barbies. This is unplanned investment. I invested in Barbies, but I couldn't sell them. And so now I got Barbies that I don't want. I didn't plan on this. It's just, marketplace is fickle. I didn't actually watch the movie before buying the Barbie, so I didn't know that it was a Ken movie. And so there it was. I'm stuck with all these Barbies. This is investment, and it wasn't planned. So we're only looking at the planned part of investment. And this is not going to be super important for us. I don't think we're ever going to mention it again. But it is a change in spirit from what we had before. What we had before was, let's just add up all the stuff. Okay? An empirical exercise, let's find out the numbers. But now, we're using the same logic, the same categories, but now we're talking about intent. We're talking about why people are doing what they're doing. Right? And why do consumers buy stuff? And why do firms buy stuff? Now we're making stories. We're trying to understand the world and the decisions people make in the world. And so now, this unintended investment isn't part of anyone's intent, right? It's unintended by definition. And so we want to leave that out because we're really going to start to look at what do people want to do and why do they want to do that and how does that affect the economy. And that's the reason I mentioned planned investment here, that we're changing our attitudes as we're going into this. Okay? We're not yet going to talk much about investment. We will later. Like investment's going to be super important for us, but not yet. That'll be the next chapter. Okay, so if we want to tell a story, so we're going to say planned aggregate expenditure is equal to consumption plus planned investment plus government funding plus net exports. For the moment, we are not going to try to make a story about planned investment. We're not going to try to make a story about government spending. We're not going to make a story about foreigners because they're shrewd. Everyone knows that. Can't be shrewd. And so we're just going to focus on consumption. Our entire story for our first pass through this is just going to be about consumption and why do people buy stuff. Okay? And so we know we have on the left, we have expenditure. Here's the stuff that's produced. And those things have to be the same, right? Expenditure and the value of the stuff that gets produced, they have to be the same from our sending stuff. Okay, so our story is going to be about consumption, about why do people buy stuff. So this is the first time we're putting motivation in here explicitly. This is going to be a very simple motivation for people, but a motivation for people why they're buying stuff. And we are going to, in particular, think that people buy stuff, and this is going to be deep, and you will be shocked at the insights that economists have, that when they have a lot of income, they buy more stuff. And you can see, Nobel Prizes all around. More income, more stuff. And you may know yourself, you get a nice job, you buy more stuff. When you don't have a nice job, you don't buy as much stuff because you don't have the money. Right? So that's going to be our idea. Okay? Very simple idea. We're going to talk about, in particular, after-tax income, because if the government takes all your money, well, you earned it, but it's gone, so it doesn't really affect your spending. We're going to think that primarily spending is determined by your income. Okay. Now, it's important to realize this sounds like totally obvious, but it's not quite, because spending also depends on other things. You could, for example, I had a guy that lived next door to me in the dorms. He was, relative to me, from a very, very rich family. They all gave him $50,000 cars in 1984. So, you know, him and his, like, oh, they had loads of money. And they had all the way, they had, you will not believe this, he had compact discs. I know. Like, he was the first one I ever saw that had compact discs, or even knew what store where you could buy them. Okay, gosh, was that guy? Oh, man. Mr. Trader was up there. So, yeah, and he would plan on graduating and go out and buy himself. So he was from a wealthy family, right? And I had no income. I was a student. He had no income. He was a student. Who do you think spent more? Obviously him, right? Because he had wealth. So it's not just our current income that affects our spending. Like even when Bill Gates quit Microsoft, and he no longer, pretend like he didn't have any income coming in from it, but pretend like he didn't, just has a big pile of money, like a pile of gold. He's still going to spend, even with no income, because he has wealth, right? So it's not just income that matters. It's also how much wealth you've got, which is different from income. You have a nice job, that's nice, you'll buy stuff because you have a job, but also if you were sitting on 50 million euros, you'd buy stuff too, right? Even without any income at all. Also, it's going to matter in real life. You know, do you think you're going to keep your job? If you think you're going to get fired or you're going to quit, maybe you won't buy so much, saving for the future. If you think you're going to get promoted, even though you have low income now, you might spend a lot because the future looks great, right? And so life is more complicated than this, but we're going to start in our story just thinking that what matters is your current income. Okay? Okay? Simplifying the world. Okay? I don't think, I have not yet run into a student who has objected to income mattering for how much you spend, but clearly lots of other things are going on as well. Right? Okay, so this is going to be our story. We're going to assume that consumption equals C bar, which is just some number, like 500, little c times y minus t. So C is consumption. C bar is what we're going to call autonomous consumption. This is the consumption that you would make even if you had no income. So you're just living off your existing wealth, or maybe gifts from your mom or whatever. Right? Okay. C, little c, is what we're going to call the marginal propensity to consume, which is like a really, really complicated way to say easy idea. You will note that we are trying, well, there's two reasons why it's said in such a complicated way. The first one is that it was invented way back in the dawn of time when people talk weird. And so the fact that they're talking weird is just a figment of the time. And of course, the other reason is that we're trying to sound all deep and meaningful for a simple concept so that we sound smarter than we actually are, and so we use big words. Marginal just means extra. Propensity, which you never run into this day, just means tendency. So our extra tendency to consume. It's going to be the extra amount that we consume if we get a little richer. Okay? So if you get more income, if you get a raise at work, how much more do you buy? That's it. Okay? T is your tax, and Y is your income. Okay? Again, all of this is real, so this is your real income. We're ignoring prices. Right? Notice that here, remember there's three aspects to GDP. This is just GDP, because we're thinking about it for an individual, but we're also thinking about it for society as a whole. Right? We're thinking there's a whole bunch of individuals just like this. This is for society as a whole. How much do they consume? It depends on society's income. And that's not surprising, but this is why. This is just the GDP that we know and love, right? Because income, expenditure, and the amount of stuff produced all have to be the same. Right? And this is important. So here we're looking at the aspect of GDP That is the income bit. That's our story. When people look at their current income and they decide how much to spend. Okay. We have a graph of this here. So in this, we've got two bits. We've got what's called induced consumption. This is the consumption that you make because you have a job. Right? And so this is your disposable income. So you get paid this much, the government takes that much in taxes, we'll pretend like that's zero, you don't lose anything yet. Later on it will come up, but you don't lose anything yet. Suppose T to zero. You got your income minus your taxes. Taxes, of course, can be negative, right? If the government's giving you money, if it's a transfer payment, so maybe it's Y plus whatever the government gives you, but that's how much you get coming in every month or every year. And then you say, well, from that, I'm going to spend a fraction of this. So we're going to think that little c is some kind of fraction. Our marginal propensity to consume is some kind of fraction. That is, when you're walking down the street and you get 100 euros of a raise, yay, I'm going to spend more. You don't spend all of it, of the extra 100 euros, you spend a percentage of it on average. Now, of course, everyone's different, but on average in the economy, if everyone gets 100 euros raise, they're going to spend a fraction of that. In terms of what we actually think C is little c, this marginal propensity to consume, has been studied to death. It's been estimated for all kinds of countries. You should be thinking of it in terms of like 0.95, something like that. That when people get a bit richer, they buy 95, they get 100 euros, they spend 95 euros, and they save 5 euros. Okay? It varies from country to country. Japan famously has very low marginal propensity to consume. They tend to save more if they get a little richer. Other countries, we're looking at the US, spend more when they get a little richer. But something like that, 0.9, 0.95. For theory classes, it doesn't really matter too much. If you were actually like in government deciding on policy, it would start to be important. But for us, just understanding the economy, there's some fraction, and you should be thinking about it like in the 90, 95% kind of ballpark. Okay, so this is the consumption that varies with your income. If you get a bit richer, not in terms of wealth, but in terms of income, how much does your spending change? And your other bit is autonomous consumption, C bar, which does not vary with your income. So it doesn't depend on the job you've got, it's just what you're doing. So what is this? This is coming from your wealth. If you lost your job, and when we look at people who lose their job and have no income coming in at all, they typically spend something. Okay? Now it's different between different people, but most people have a nest egg somewhere, and they spend out of that for a while before they find another job. And so what does autonomous consumption depend on? Well, very particularly depends on wealth, right? If Mr. Gates has no income, he's going to continue spending just fine. You don't need to worry about him too much. He's got a giant pile, and he's just gonna spend off the pile, right? If I lose my job, I will cut back on my spending, but I've got a nest egg, I'll be okay for a while, and I'll continue spending, right? If you don't have a job, I don't know your personal financial situation, but an average student loses their job and they have no income, they don't have lots of savings, and so their autonomous consumption is going to be quite low, because they don't have a big pot of money to spend out of. Right, so it really depends on wealth. Now we are looking at the aggregate of the economy, so we're looking at the average over everybody for autonomous spending. So we're going to average me, Mr. O'Leary, and you, and we're going to put us all in a big pot and say on average how much wealth do we got, and how does that affect our autonomous consumption as a whole. Okay. Importantly for us, autonomous consumption also is going to depend on consumer optimism. Right? Because if we think next year is going to be terrible, and there's a good chance that we're going to lose our jobs, then we're going to save now. Our autonomous consumption will be low because we're pessimistic about the future. And if we think next year is going to be great, we're going to get promoted, we're just going to be rolling in money, autonomous consumption is going to be quite high because we don't need to save. We're going to be rich next year because of the promotion. And so there's no need to save, and our autonomous consumption will be high. So we're going to think about autonomous consumption as something, at least in our first pass, that varies with how optimistic we are about the future. is our marginal propensity to consume. If we get a little bit richer, that is, we have a little bit more income, how much of that can we spend? 0.95, 0.9, something like that. We will assume it'll be important for us that it's somewhere between 0 and 1. In principle, it doesn't have to be. Like you can imagine, for example, you're saving up for a new car and you need 20,000 euros to buy your car, and you've got 19,000 euros, and so you're not spending anything, and then you get 1,000 more euros, and all of a sudden you spend 20,000 euros. In which case, your marginal propensity to consume is what? 20, like well above 1. Because you got 1,000 euros more, and you spent 20,000 euros more. Because you were saving up for something, right? It doesn't have to be between 0 and 1. There's nothing in human nature that requires it between 0 and 1. Like you could get a raise at work, and all of a sudden just go crazy at the trap. Like this happens, people do this, individuals do this, but we are looking at the average over the whole economy. And so it's not just what one individual does, but what the average is, and we've measured the heck out of this. And it always does appear to be a fraction. There's nothing that says it has to be a fraction. It could be greater than 1. It could even be less than 0. Right? Anything is possible. Humans do all sorts of things. But on average across an entire economy, saying it's a fraction does not seem at all controversial, or we've never found anything where it was even remotely different between, than being a fraction. Potentially could be. Okay. So here's our consumption function. I've got disposable income down here, right? And it is how much I spend, my expenditure on consumption, right? If I have no income, 0 income, then I still spend something, C bar, right? And then, starting from there, if I find 100 euros, I get 100 euros in income, then I'm going to increase my consumption by C times 100 euros. So I've added 100 euros this way, and I've gone up by C, a fraction, times that. So the slope of this line is just this marginal propensity to consume, this extra tendency to consume. Okay? People with me here? So here is sort of a graph of consumption. Clearly this is ridiculous. Like, linear thing is not real. On the other hand, it's not as horrible as you would think. Like, clearly it's not a straight line, but it's not a straight line either, right? This seems to be capturing something real. You can disagree, but it seems to be capturing something real. We don't literally think it's a straight line. We definitely think that lots of other things are in what determines people's consumption, not just this stuff. But it is not horribly off either. Right? And so we're going to go with this. We're going to continue with this sort of straight line story about where consumption comes from. Okay. So that's our story. This is like our entire, like, we introduced the character in the novel. Now, our character is these consumers, and they do this autonomous consumption that doesn't depend on income, and then they look at their income and they increase their consumption accordingly, just according to this line here. Okay? This is their motivation, this is their behavior. Okay? Now we have a story. Clearly, very, very, very overly simplified story, but you decide, is it capturing something real about consumer behavior or not? When you get a raise at work, do you spend more? Don't you spend more? Do you think other people behave that way or not? Okay, so now we need to put it together. So that's our only story. That's our only character in this story. This is one of these desert islands sort of situation where Tom Hanks is talking to a ball and that kind of thing. There's only one guy, and he's just got his monologue the whole time. We just have consumers. Very simple story. But now we can put it together. Now, put it together, and what I've done here is I've put some numbers on it. I have here, planned aggregate expenditure is C plus IP plus G plus net exports, just as we were saying. And we're just assuming that these things are IP, G, and NX are just constant. We have no story for the motivation of firms yet. We have no story for the motivation of government, and we have no story for the motivation of foreigners. So they're just numbers. We don't have any story for them yet. We will get stories for them because they're clearly important, but we're starting out as simple as possible. So they're just numbers like, maybe investment is 200 and government spending is 300 and then exports is whatever. And so we added the consumption function, our C bar plus little c plus times y, little c times y, and we get this. So this 950 is autonomous consumption plus IP plus G plus net exports. It's all that autonomous stuff together. All the stuff that doesn't depend on income. This is autonomous expenditure. And the 0.8y, that is all the stuff that does depend on income, right? And in this case, all we've got is little c times y from the consumption function. So our marginal propensity to consume here must be 0.8 because that's the only induced bit that we've got, is the induced consumption. So here, little c, marginal propensity to consume, is 0.8. A nice fraction, also something that's easy to work with, so that's why we got it. Now we should really think about it as high as 0.9, 0.95, but 0.8 is a nice, easy number to work with. So if I graph this thing, if we have 0 income, then we have 950 aggregate expenditure. And as we get more income, we're going to have higher expenditure, going up at the rate of 0.8, the slope of 0.8 in this line. Now, you'll notice I graphed output here. That's just GDP. But we're not really thinking about it as output here at all. We're thinking about it as income. Now remember, we can think about GDP in 3 ways. It can be output, the stuff that's produced, the value of the stuff produced. It can be the income, and it can be expenditure. So what I've done by drawing this graph is that we have the 3 ways of thinking about GDP. I've separated one of them off. Right? On the bottom here, we have output and income, those 2 ways of thinking about GDP. And then we put expenditure over here. Right? This is, very importantly, expenditure. So those are our 3 ways of thinking about GDP, and I've separated them out, okay, arbitrarily, because we know that they all have to be the same. Okay. So when I drew it with output, that was kind of wrong. Like it's all y. Output is y, income is y, and planned aggregate expenditure in the end will be y as well. Income, expenditure, output, all the same, all y, all real GDP. But we are going to separate them. So what I was doing here is I was saying, if my income is 0, how much do we spend as a society? If my income is 100, how much do we spend? If my income is 1,000, how much do we spend? Our income as a society is 1 million, how much do we spend? Right? And we just plot those out. So this is thinking about this lower axis as income, the income axis. And then we convert that into spending. And now we have to convert that back into output. And yeah, let me not do that. Let me leave it here and just say that we'll continue. We'll continue next time, but where we've gotten to right here, right now, this is everything that can be on the exam. Everything up to and including this minute is on the exam. Everything next week is not on the exam. So you have a chance to prepare. Okay? Okay, see you next week.